Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It is the 4th of June. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date on your local weather information for your community and village, and you can easily do that by going to weather.gov/Alaska. You can also go to arh.noaa.gov. Weather info line's always on at 800-472-0391. You can find us on Facebook at NWS Alaska, and find us on Twitter using the hashtag AKwx. You can participate in the conversation there. In the afternoon, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing at NWS Alaska and NWS Anchorage. If you search for AKwx TV, you'll be able to find this complete broadcast from our broadcast partner here at Alaska Public on their website at alaskapublic.org and, of course, on YouTube later on in the evening. Now let's go on into a polar orbiting satellite view. The stargazers would love this, and they'd probably be floating around on their spaceships for a moment. But we're gazing down at the Seward Peninsula, looking through clouds that we see over land here. Here's Shishmaref, here's Tin City, and Nome would be, let's see if we can see it, it's probably just a little bit to the south there, just off your screen. What you're looking at here, and there's Kotzebue too, if you want a point of reference. What you're looking at here is a lot of sea ice still across the outer parts of Kotzebue Sound and into the lagoons, as you see there. But this was last week. Let's skip ahead to now. Here we go. Poof, it is gone. What you see out here is cloud cover working up from the south and from the west. Those high clouds streaming in there. A little bit of ice there just east of Espenberg and south and west of Kotzebue. And west of Deering there, still a little bit of ice out around the lagoon, and a small patch of ice just north and west of Espenberg and northeast of Shishmaref. But most of it's gone thanks to the warm weather that we've seen. So if you're watching the ice conditions there across the Chukchi Sea, changes continue there. Here's the broader view, and we'll take a look at this again going into the marine weather segment, of course. But you can see the analyzed areas from today. There's that little patch of ice we just saw in the satellite picture. And here's the main ice edge. Most of what we're looking at there, in fact, just north and west of Point Lay, a lot of just thin strips here off the Chukchi Seacoast. So a lot of things are changing across the Chukchi Seacoast with the warm weather that's been moving there. And this even as northerly winds are coming across the Bering Strait, and you'll see that in the satellite picture here in just a minute. Take a look at the broader view here with me in just a moment when we take a look at that satellite view. You'll see that cold air sneaking through the Bering Strait again. It's pretty neat stuff. In the meantime, part of the weather change that's been happening in the west and now in the Gulf of Alaska is pushing wind across the Deltana and Tanana Flats region as well as the eastern Alaska range, and because of that, a wind advisory is going to start up tonight around 6 o'clock until about 9 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. Expecting some gusty winds mainly west of the Tote cutoffs there. So if you're going through the passes, whether driving or flying, expect some turbulence if you're flying, expect some windy conditions if you're driving. Those gusts again could be on the order of 45 to about 50 miles per hour. Now back to the satellite picture there, because I just want to get right back to, not yet. Fire danger first. We'll do satellites in just a moment. Fire danger shows the high fire danger mainly south of the Brooks Range in the upper Yukon Valley. Things have eased somewhat here across areas around Fort Yukon and just to the south as you get into the areas around Circle and southward. But as you get into Fairbanks and westward, there's still some pockets of extreme fire danger, and then again drier conditions out across the west that are really not going to get a whole lot better very quickly. However, for areas in the south, we do see some improvement with recent rains. And we'll probably continue to see improvement across northern parts of southeast because your fire season just never seems to last that long. And wetter weather is moving in there. Also across most of south central and southwestern Alaska has seen your fair share of wet weather, but there are still some patchy areas of very dry weather across the western interior and the upper Kuskokwim Valley. So we'll continue to watch for those areas. Now we go back to the satellite picture, and you can see that colder air snaking through. Watch this area right here around the Bering Strait and south of Gamble to about Nunivak Island. This is the region that is showing that cooler, drier air working into the warmer waters of the Bering Strait. In the meantime, we've got a nice comma-shaped cloud structure here. That is another area of low pressure that's working toward the Bering Sea and the Aleutians as we head into the weekend. Here's another view of that. And you can see once again that cold air dropping south. We've got a northerly flow coming across the western coast of Alaska and also pushing cooler weather and a lot of fog forming underneath that very stable air mass across the Bering Strait. And you'll see a better picture of this on the visible satellite pictures. The sun's coming up here, it sweeps across and everything comes into view. Look at all that fog out there from St. Paul all the way up to St. Lawrence Island. That strip of moisture expanding as that cold air drops southward into the warmer waters. And then very stable air here across the Aleutians and across the North Pacific, thanks to high pressure trying to keep things quiet and settle down. So a lot of low stratus and fog out there. Across the Gulf of Alaska, several circulations across the region. Here's one of them, a little bit stronger, just south and east of the Kenai Peninsula. That's forcing a lot of wind and wet weather across south central and up into the Matanuska and Susitna valleys, into the Wrangell-St. Elias region where we've had some thunderstorm activity today, and more wet weather into southeastern Alaska. It's also taking all that moisture and moving it northward into the interior, and as that process continues, we're wringing out the rainfall. Not a whole lot of really wet weather seen on most of the weather observations for the interior yet, but it will be moving northward as you can expect. And with that moisture moving north, we'll probably see some snow along the Arctic coast and maybe some rainfall across the coastal plain. So things very unsettled across the interior now and across the north, across the southeast, and across south central, and lingering wet weather here and storm clouds firing up across southwestern Alaska this evening. So things still pretty unsettled, but the major pattern has shifted eastward while more stable and cooler weather has shifted to the west. So changes from where we were just about a week or two ago, and it looks like things will stay kind of in that general pattern as we head into the next week. Today's weather, low pressure just north of Kodiak there, as we were talking about, 988 millibars there. Warmer and wetter weather moving back into southeast, and another wave coming in behind it at 999 millibars. A few storms around the Wrangell-St. Elias and northwestern parts of the Panhandle. Low pressure moving into the interior. This is where all of this is headed, north and northwest. You can see the pressure gradient tightening up all the way around the storm system. Light snow up around Barrow this afternoon. Drier weather just west of the St. Matthew Island waters, and then there's that stable area of fog and stratus with high pressure just to the west of Shemya and east of the Kamchatka Peninsula. As we head into tonight, that organization of low pressure systems in the Gulf is going to start to fall apart and kind of reorganize itself back toward the interior. We'll still see a few showers and thunderstorms across the Alaska Range on the west side and on the north side, but a lot of what we're going to be dealing with in south central and Kodiak and southeast is mainly going to be rain, and a lot of it, if you're in the eastern Kenai Peninsula, Seward, all the way up to Portage and Whittier and Valdez, you're talking about several inches of rain just in the next 24 hours, in some cases 2 to 3 inches, maybe some higher amounts there, especially around Valdez. And for folks in Valdez and eastward toward Yakutat, the next day is going to be another wet day, another 2 to 3 inches of rain, certainly possible there as that very wet flow is pointed right in your general direction, kind of like a fire hose right into a brick wall. Well, if you look out to the west, we've got colder air working down the western coast, and this is going to be the leading edge of some cooler weather. It's moving very slowly southward, and as that punch works its way southward, we'll reinforce the drier weather across the west coast. Showers and a few thunderstorms there across the western side of the Alaska Range, so maybe from Slate Mute east to the mountains. Otherwise, the eastern side, once you get into the Susitna Valley, things should be pretty quiet. We'll see a few showers and thunderstorms across the eastern passes as well, and northward, where we get a few occasional sunny breaks. And if we don't have that, chances are the thunderstorm activity is going to be very limited. Across the North Slope, chance for rain there. You may see that mix in with some snow across the coastline itself, especially in the morning, but by the afternoon it looks to be fairly warm. And across southeast, periods of moderate to occasionally heavy rain will be likely for you, with several disturbances working over the Gulf. By Saturday, not a whole lot of change. You're going to see more showers across south central. For the Cook Inlet region, including Kenai up to Anchorage, there will be some passing rainfall. A lot of that will likely be worse in the morning and then start to improve as we get into Saturday afternoon and into Sunday. The focus for showers and thunderstorms will still be across the central and eastern interior. There's another wave of rain working through the eastern Gulf. That could bring some heavier rainfall back into southeast. And way out in the west, remember that comma-shaped cloud that we saw in the satellite picture? Well, there it is now on the surface map. Low pressure is working into the central and western chain. We'll start to work into the southern Bering perhaps by the end of the weekend, and that occlusion isn't terribly strong, so we'll have to see what it offers us in the long term. but for right now, this will start to nudge its way northward just a little bit more and try and move into that very stable air mass that we saw in the satellite picture. It had the very smooth, flat layers of clouds, fog, and stratus there. In the meantime, you're looking at cool weather again across the Arctic coast. The wind should be settling down as too. You'll see in the marine maps coming up in just a little while. The winds are going to be a little bit stronger on Friday. Saturday should show some improvement there. And across the west coast, winds will be switching around as several waves of disturbed weather are dropping southward there. So a lot of changes all the way around, but the most notable change again is unsettled weather and very wet weather across the central, the south, and southeast, while stable weather has been ruling the roost for the last couple days across the west, and it looks like overall that pattern should continue. Temperature map today, back in the 40s and 50s for southeast. A few areas around Juneau, Haines, and Skagway were a little bit cooler than what we saw yesterday. For central and southern parts of southeast, all the way to the Dixon entrance, most areas hovered in the mid-50s for a good part of the day. Around Valdez and Cordova, temperatures moved into the upper 40s this afternoon. 50 around Seward, 55 in Homer, 50 in Kenai, low 50s for Anchorage as well. Wasilla, Palmer, areas around Talkeetna all stayed in the lower to mid-50s for most of the day. Around the Alcan border, it was in the lower 60s. Healy was 55, Fort Greeley was 59, and Fairbanks, you saw 63 if you started your day there. Tanana was 53 degrees. Fort Yukon saw 45. It was 43 in Arctic Village. And Aktivik Pass closer to 30 degrees, 20s and 30s for most of the Arctic coast. The Kotzebue Sound region hovered in the 30s and 40s. Kotzebue itself was about 46. Nome saw 48 with Unalakleet around 48 degrees as well. Galena was in the lower 50s, McGrath mid-50s, Bethel was about 56, Nunivak Island 46, and St. Lawrence Island only in the upper 30s today with Tin City at 33. As you look a little bit further south and west, it was a little bit warm across south and western Alaska earlier today, and there were some periods of heavy rain at times. You saw a little bit of a burst around King Salmon and Dillingham late this afternoon, 46 around Cape Newenham, 51 degrees for Kodiak, 40s and 50s for parts of the Alaska Peninsula with temperatures just at about 40 degrees for the Pribilofs. St. George was a little warmer than St. Paul today, and lower to mid-40s for the central and western chain. Dutch Harbor and Alaska showed 46. Overnight low temperatures will stay mild in the interior, back in the mid-40s there. That's a big sign that there's a lot of moisture moving in. The North Slope in the 20s and 30s today, and tonight 34 in Nome. Southwest in the lower to mid-40s, Kodiak 46, and closer to 50 for South Central, with the mid-40s for South Central, near 50 for Southeast, mid-40s for South Central, and lower 40s for most of the chain. Shemya, though, only 38, about the same for St. Paul, with a high of 45 there tomorrow. Closer to 46 in Nunivak Island. It looks like Bethel will be in the mid to upper 50s. About the same for South Central, but it's going to be a soggy day for many. Upper 50s for most of Southeast. 54 in Kodiak, the Alaska Peninsula, including Cold Bay and Falls Pass, back in the mid-50s. Sandpoint only 54. The Arctic coast in the lower to mid-30s there. Barrow may hit the freezing point. Kotzebue Sound temperatures will jump into the mid-40s to nearly 50 degrees once you get away from the coast. 50 in Nome. The interior in the upper 60s, and again, that kind of heat could help to spark a few more showers and storms, and you see that there for your flying weather map. MVFR conditions for South Central and Southeast. We're going to see IFR in the morning across the northern Gulf Coast and into the eastern Kenai Peninsula, and some of that poor visibility will hover very close to the coastline and as heavier rainfall is passing through. We also expect to see IFR conditions at times across the North Slope, most likely in the morning, and you'll see a wider swath of MVFR across the central and eastern parts of the Bering Sea, especially with that cold air flowing out of the Bering Strait there. Expect a kind of a highway of MVFR conditions if you're flying through St. Paul, St. George to Nunivak Island, and then things should improve as you get closer to the YK coastline. Let's check pass conditions. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass are both expected to see MVFR transitioning toward IFR conditions during the day. Adigan Pass may hold on to MVFR a little bit longer. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, if we're going to see storms, chances are it's going to be on the west side tomorrow. MVFR conditions should prevail through most of the pass. Rainy Pass, we expect rainy conditions and MVFR there, and on the western side, a better chance for storms. Windy Pass, MVFR conditions, and we do expect a few storms to fire up in the vicinity tomorrow. Isabel Pass, MVFR conditions there. Storms are possible during your day. And Mentasta Pass, we also expect marginal conditions through most of the day. We're going to lean that way as we go through the day. In Tanita Pass, and a chance for some showers and storms, especially on the eastern side. And Portage Pass, MVFR conditions with IFR outside of Prince William Sound, VFR on the west side. There will be rain passing through the region, which could limit that from time to time, but overall probably VFR at this point. And Chilkoot and White Pass, we're expecting MVFR conditions throughout most of the day. Freezing levels show that colder air is starting to take over more of the Gulf as low pressure is settling in. That's pushed a lot of the warmer air into the western parts of Canada and Yukon and the interior, where freezing levels are as high as 6,000 feet. We don't see our 8,000-foot freezing line up into southeastern Alaska anymore. That's moving out toward British Columbia. And there is some warmer air across eastern sections of Asia. And the surface freezing line with that colder air that we saw in the satellite picture has certainly shown up on the map as well. That's dropped southward past St. Matthew and heading for St. Paul and St. George. The icing potential is a little bit lower on the north slope tomorrow, above 2,000 feet. Some of that could be occasional there. There's enough lift and moisture in place that you need to keep an eye on that. Most areas in Alaska will be dealing with light to isolated moderate. There's enough lift and moisture and cool air now across south central that we could get some icing potential across some of the southern mountains and southwestern mountains there closer to Cook Inlet. So Anchorage pilots and folks flying in out of Matanuska and the Susitna Valley region, and maybe even Kodiak and Prince William Sound, should keep an eye on weather conditions there as you're getting started tomorrow. The jet stream shows a pretty decent trough across the North Pacific. That's allowing that cold air to push that warm and wet air out of the North Pacific and right into southern Alaska now. And a lot of that is moving its way into the interior, as we saw. Thanks to 9,000-foot winds there at 15 to as high as 30 knots coming in from the south and southwest. Those conditions are changing, but that colder air is dropping in across the west coast, 20 to 25 knots over the Bering Strait, and a ridge of high pressure is allowing some stronger winds to come in from the western Pacific, those as high as 50 knots, and the south and southwesterly flows moving across southeast at 40 to 50 knots as well. 3,000 feet, similar conditions then, 20 to 30 knots from the south and west. You'll see a broader southerly flow, a little bit stronger there across south central. Winds diminish across the interior, 10 to 15 knots there at 3,000 feet. Easterlies across the Arctic coast, and light winds and pretty stable air underneath the Bering Sea at 50 knots there across most areas, including the Pribilofs. I'm going to watch for turbulence across the northern coast. Look for some occasional moderate around Prince William Sound, especially in the morning and through Portage Valley. On the eastern side of Kodiak Island and right along the coastline there, the outer coast for southeastern Alaska, most of that below 6,000 feet thanks to the very well-mixed air. And across the Arctic coast below 2,000 feet, watch for some occasional moderate there around and just north of Barrow. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Venus and the super-duper Jupiter conjunction. Welcome to Stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. Back in February, Venus, Mars, and Earth lined up in such a way that Mars and Venus performed a super scoochie in the evening sky as viewed from Earth.
The official astronomical term for a planetary scoochie is a conjunction. And if you happen to be a fan of planetary conjunctions like James, you're going to be really happy on June 30th.
That's right, Dean. Venus is on its way to a super-duper close rendezvous with Jupiter. This pairing will be so close that Jupiter and Venus will be less than a full moon width apart.
What are we talking about, and how does it all work? Let's show you.
As many of you know, the planets orbit the sun in nested ellipses. When you view the solar system from above, the planets look like runners on a racetrack, with each planet in a different lane. Mercury being the closest planet to the sun, then Venus, then Earth, and then Mars, and so on.
As we travel around the sun, we're all traveling at different speeds. The astronomer Johannes Kepler noticed that planets closer to the sun travel faster than those farther away. For example, it takes Mercury only 88 Earth days to orbit the sun, moving at a brisk 106,000 miles per hour. Venus, by comparison, takes 225 days to orbit the sun, moving at a slower 78,000 miles per hour.
Earth takes approximately 365 days, or 1 year, to orbit the sun, traveling approximately 66,000 miles per hour. Meanwhile, Mars takes almost 2 years to orbit the sun. On average, Mars is moving at just under 59,000 miles per hour, dragging its two moons Phobos and Deimos along with it.
As we get further from the sun, Kepler's observations of planetary motion still hold true. And although Kepler didn't know what force caused the planets to move at different speeds, we now know it's the result of the gravitational attraction of the sun.
Jupiter takes almost 12 years to orbit the sun, traveling at a pokey 29,000 miles per hour. Jupiter was at its closest approach to Earth this year back in late January. Since that time, Earth has traveled over 237 million miles, leaving Jupiter behind.
Venus, which is traveling faster than the Earth, has rounded the Sun and is on its way between us and the Sun. However, as it travels, it will appear along our line of sight with respect to Jupiter.
And this, fellow stargazers, is what causes a conjunction. Now you're probably asking yourself, why don't Venus and Jupiter get super close every year? Let's show you.
Not only are the planets' orbits nested ellipses, they're also inclined to each other. In other words, the orbits, although they appear flat, they all vary in their tilt, slightly.
We call the tilt of a planet's orbit its orbital inclination. It's the variation in each planet's orbital inclination and the timing of planetary passages that makes some conjunctions closer than others.
Venus and Jupiter usually have a conjunction every year, and being the two brightest planets in the sky, they can put on quite a show. For example, in July 2012, Venus and Jupiter had a close conjunction in the constellation Taurus the Bull, forming a beautiful triangle with the waning crescent moon just before sunrise on July 15th.
Then, in May 2013, Venus and Jupiter had an even closer conjunction and were joined by Mercury on the evening of May 28th.
Then, in August 2014, Venus and Jupiter had an impressively close conjunction in the pre-dawn sky on August 18th.
If you notice, there is a pattern here. Each year, we alternate between morning conjunctions and evening conjunctions. That's because every 9 months, Venus alternates between being on the eastern side of the Sun, where it's visible just after sunset, and we call it the evening star.
And then Venus passes the Earth, is caught in the glare of the Sun for about a week, and then reappears on the western side of the Sun, where it's visible before the sun rises. In this position, we call Venus the morning star.
So, as you probably guessed, Venus is currently in its evening star position, and after sunset on Tuesday, June 30th, 2015, we'll experience one of the closest Venus-Jupiter conjunctions humans have seen in a long time. So, mark your calendars.
And if you have clear skies, you can see it for yourself. Keep looking up.
Time for a look at southeast marine weather now, and you'll notice the winds coming in from the south. That's driving a lot of wet weather right along the coast there, and there may be some turbulence and some gustier winds across the coast and through some of the bays and passes. Look for winds in the Lynn Canal to be out of the south, 35 knots, 7-foot seas there, 20 knots a little bit further south in the central and southern waters, Clarence Strait, looking at 3-foot seas. For Saturday, the winds diminish in all areas, about 15 to 20 knots for most. Look for a southerly flow to continue around the outer coast with 7 to 8-foot seas, highest outside of Dixon Entrance. In southeastern Alaska and a little bit further inside, you're looking at 15 knots with a 3-foot sea around the Clarence Strait, and to as high as 20 knots in the Lynn Canal with 4-foot seas there on Saturday afternoon. Now for south central, the winds will be pretty much out of the due south, and it looks like we'll be driving wet weather right into Prince William Sound and the Kenai Peninsula. No surprise there, 15 to 20 knots, a little bit stronger around the eastern Barrens at 25 knots. Winds coming down for eastern sections of Kodiak Island tomorrow as well, and southerlies coming up Cook Inlet around 20 knots with 25 knots inside of Shelikof Strait with a 9-foot sea. That diminishes, and winds will become a little more variable with time on Saturday. Seas still holding around 6 to 7 feet, dropping to 3 feet east of Kodiak, 2 feet inside of Shelikof Strait, 10 to 15 knots inside and outside of Prince William Sound with 7-foot seas in the northern Gulf and 2 to 3-foot seas around Cook Inlet with a south and southeasterly flow on Saturday. For the Alaska Peninsula, a light southwest flow inside of the Bristol Bay region, a 3-foot sea there. Southwesterlies in the North Pacific, 20 to 25 knots with a 6 to 8-foot sea. And northwesterlies north of Cold Bay and the southern tip of the peninsula there on the Bering Sea coast, 8-foot seas should be expected for Friday. As we get into Saturday, look for those winds to diminish and become fairly light. A southwest flow will continue inside of Bristol Bay with 15 knots and a 3-foot sea. Otherwise, 5-foot seas for the Pacific coast and 4-foot seas a little bit further down the Alaska Peninsula on Saturday. For the Aleutians, north and westerly winds continue. That'll keep you cool and keep that fog and stratus bank fairly close to home. Look for 6, 7, even 8-foot seas across the Bering Sea coast for Friday with 5 to 6-foot seas along the Pacific. 4 to 5-foot seas across areas near Kiska and out towards Shemya. Only 10 to 15 knot winds there from the south and the west. And then as you look out a little bit further closer to Kiska, those join in on that northwesterly flow. As we get into Friday, you'll notice the easterly shift there around Shemya, 15 knots with an 8-foot sea. South and southeasterly winds start to pull back into the storm that's moving up out of the North Pacific. But our winds will remain light and somewhat variable for the central and eastern chain. As we get into Saturday, you're looking at 4-foot seas. Again, very stable weather here, and also 4 to 5-foot seas across the North Pacific. And you have to go all the way out toward Atka to get back into that southeasterly wind. Here's a look at the west coast now, and that northerly wind showing up on the satellite picture, showing up here in your marine weather. That continues, a 20 and 25 knot wind from the north and northwest coming right down the coast. A westerly wind across St. Matthew. 4-foot seas there, northwesterlies around the Pribilofs with a 7-foot sea. And Saturday, a north and easterly flow from St. Lawrence Island to the St. Matthew Island waters, 15 knots with a westerly wind outside of Kuskokwim Bay. 3-foot seas there and southwesterlies around the Pribilofs on Saturday. So all in all, the winds remain fairly light in the Bering. A little bit stronger for the Beaufort Seacoast, though. An east and northeasterly wind on Friday, 25 knots all the way out toward Point Barrow. Northeasterlies coming down the Chukchi Seacoast and into the outer areas of Kotzebue Sound, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. As we get into Saturday, the wind should diminish in all areas there, 10 to 15 knots for the Beaufort, out of the east and northeast winds for the Chukchi Sea, about 15 to 20 knots. More of a northwesterly shift, though, outside of Kotzebue Sound. You're looking at 3 to 4-foot seas there in the Chukchi Seacoast for Saturday. Recapping tonight's weather, it's going to be a wet start to Friday and Saturday for most of south central, southwestern Alaska, and for southeast as very wet weather's moving across the Gulf. The entire weather pattern has shifted from unsettled in the west to now unsettled in the Gulf, southeast, south central, and southwest, and eventually the interior. Watch for showers and thunderstorms this evening around the Alaska Range and points north where we've had some sunnier breaks there. Cold air is dropping down the western coast, and as that drier air moves southward, it's pushing warmer and wetter air northward. A better chance for storms on the north and western side of the Alaska Range for tomorrow and across parts of the interior closer to the Alcan. Periods of heavy rain should be expected from Seward all the way around through Prince William Sound and north and eastern parts of southeast. More showery in southeast and a chance for some light snow and rain to mix across the Arctic coast on Saturday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.